Everybody, I want to first apologise for the really rough video camera situation today. I myself am feeling pretty rough, and I decided I want to kind of just do a little video because I have nothing really planned, and I was on my computer already, might as well just use the webcam feature on there. I'm in my pyjamas, I'm not very well, but I thought I'd come on here and do a little bit of a reading update, more like a wrap up part 1 for the month of October. So I'm going to just go ahead and get started. So the first book was unfortunately a DNF for me, and this is one that I've seen a lot of love for on BookTube and just across the interwebs really. An epic fantasy series, the start to an epic fantasy series, and this is Malice by John Gwynne. So it is the first book in an acclaimed epic fantasy by the author, which is the Faithful and the Fallen series. Malice is a tale of blind greed, ambition and betrayal set in a world where ancient monsters are reawakening and a war to end all wars is about to begin. The world is broken and it can never be made whole again. We follow a couple of different characters. One of our first characters that we meet is Corbin, who wants nothing more than to be a warrior under King Brennan's rule, to protect and serve. But that day will come all too soon, and the price he pays will be in blood. We also follow a character called Evnis, who has sacrificed way too much. But what he wants, the power to rule, will soon be in his grasp. Nothing will stop him once he has started on this path. Veridis is the newest member of the warband for the High Prince Nathir. He is one of the most skilled swordsmen to come out of his homeland, yet he is always under the shadow of his older brother. Talking of Nathir, he has ideas and a lot of plans. Many of them don't involve his father and the High King Aquilus, nor does he agree with his father's idea to summon his fellow kings to council. The Banished Lands has a violent past where armies of men and giants clashed in battle, the earth running dark with their heart's blood. Now the stones weep red and giant worms stir, and those who can still read the signs see a danger far worse than all that has come before. So of course it sounded pretty epic, and hearing worms, dragons, that kind of thing to be featured in this sort of story, this series, I thought I was going to love it. And unfortunately I only got to around chapter 25. I just wasn't getting into it, so I did a little bit of blended reading with this one. I had the physical edition, which I no longer have now. I've since sold it on, and I was listening to the audiobook as well. And to get started with kind of how my thoughts were developing from the get-go, it just took me so long to get into. I initially thought that the heavy world building at the start, which I tend to enjoy, if not just at least understand that it's often necessary for the setup of a new epic fantasy, I just thought, okay, this is that period of time, I'll get over it, I'll get through it once I've learned what I need to learn from this world. But it was also all characters, and again, this is something that I enjoy the focus being on, characters, but I just couldn't picture where anything was taking place, who was talking, who these characters were, and for it to be so heavy with the detail on the world building and the characters, I thought it was strange that I couldn't imagine any of this. So everything was just like a merging blur, I just couldn't picture anything in my head, and that was a struggle. I usually see things play out in my mind, and it just wasn't the case with this one from the beginning. Another thing that kind of worried me from the beginning was that usually it takes me about 50 pages to get into a book, and I call that my kind of getting into the zone point, right? And this just went well beyond that. I just couldn't get into it, and I struggled to find any connections with any other characters to really care about what was going on within the story. I'm disappointed, that I found this read to be so uninteresting to me. I didn't care for the storyline, and I wasn't really intrigued enough to see this prophecy through. As I said at the beginning, I was really looking forward to seeing the dragons and kind of learning how they were depicted in this. Especially, I think John Gwynne has another series, The Shadow of the Gods, which seems to be heavy on the dragons. And I thought, this might, set me up to enjoy more of his works. But I just wasn't engaged in the storytelling, and the writing style didn't help me because I found it to be pretty dry, despite being dialogue heavy. So everything just felt like a contradiction, I didn't even get to the point with the dragons, or the worms as they're called in this. So unfortunately that was a DNF for me, and I probably wouldn't give it a go again because I know I did blended reading, but that is both physical and audiobook formatting that has ruled out my enjoyment, and I can't imagine much would change by picking up like a digital copy, you know. Sometimes I do find maybe it is the formatting that makes it a little bit, you know, hard to get into, but I've tried 2 different formats simultaneously and I just don't think it was the story for me, unfortunately. Next up, I was sent a copy of a new release from Black Crow PR, so thank you very much to them. I was also part of the book tour for this, which I talked a little bit about over on my Instagram, and this is new release Fall of Ruin and Wrath by Jennifer L. Armentrout, and this was actually my first book by this author, so yeah, it was exciting to get into. I have had Lux, the Lux series on my kind of like more mental TBR for the longest time. I've just not got around to reading it. So yeah, it was interesting to see what kind of storytelling to expect from an author that has done so much already. So, she lives by her intuition and he feeds on her pleasure. Long ago, the world was destroyed by gods. Only 9 cities were spared, separated by vast wilderness, teeming with monsters and unimaginable dangers. Each city is now ruled by a guardian, royalty, who feed on mortal pleasure. Born with an intuition that never fails, Callista knows her talents are of great value to power hungry of the world. So she lives hidden as a courtesan of the Baron of Archwood. In exchange for his protection, she grants him information. When her intuition leads her to saving a travelling prince in dire trouble, the voice inside her blazes with warning and promise. Today he'll bring her joy, one day he'll be her doom. When the Baron takes an interest in the travelling prince and the prince takes an interest in Callista, she becomes the prince's temporary companion. But the city simmers with rebellion, and with knights and monsters at her city gates and a hungry prince in her bed, intuition may not be enough to keep her safe. This is described as new adult, paranormal, kind of fantasy romance, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, especially considering I would, you know, still consider myself a very new to the romance kind of genre. It's not something I've ever usually looked out for in my books, but this being mainly romance, I would say more romance than fantasy, if you're looking at like romance fantasy, you know, that I enjoyed it. I loved it for that, you know. I found the pacing to be great. I loved the focus on drawing our anticipation and action, never verging on, you know, being boring or uninteresting, while simultaneously not being overwhelming in content. I felt like accompanying and complementing the pacing, the chapters were very concise and manageable, which, you know, added to the desire of, oh, just one more chapter, and it never was just one more chapter. I just really wanted to whiz through this. I find the characters to be intriguing, especially our main female character, Callista, known as Liz. And I quickly grew ever more curious about these highborn lords, particularly wanting to know what sort of immortal being they were. They kind of fell into this mixed hot pot of like the fae type of being, but also like an energy vampire. It was really interesting to kind of try and figure out where they would fall within these fantasy beings, and we did get a little bit more information as the story went on. I thought it was really cool that they had this like seductive magic about them, as well as being, you know, super powerful beings. They had this just this sexual energy that made people, like, it sparked the desire in others to want to share that pleasure, right? And they fed off pleasure, so it was interesting to see how that all worked together. I personally would have loved to explore deeper the relationship between Liz and Grady. They're kind of like best friends and they were orphaned together. They spent a lot of time in and out of like orphan houses and things like that and living on the streets. And I would have liked to have seen more how tightly that bond was in the present day. We get a lot of flashbacks to how close they were in the past and how they looked out for each other, which, you know, leads itself to believing that they're like that now, and that's why Grady's so protective over Liz. But you don't really get to see a lot of scenes with them actively being friends, do you know what I mean, in like the present day. So I would have really enjoyed more of that, and another friendship that I would have liked to have seen more of rather than just heard about was Liz's relationship with Naomi. In terms of romance, this was super spicy for me. I know Armentrout does a lot of spice and she's kind of like the queen of that at the moment. So I don't know how this falls and compares within the other books that she's done. But for me, this was definitely having me blushing for sure. I actually think it was like my favourite parts of the book. it was definitely, as I mentioned earlier, more romance than fantasy. It definitely didn't skip out on the fantasy themed political intrigue. You know, it didn't kind of just take over and forget that it was supposed to be a fantasy story. So that's mainly what I came in here for, even though I ended up loving the romance aspect a lot more than I expected. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars, and I cannot wait to see where book 2 takes our main character, especially with the kind of ending that we got in this book. I listened to the audiobook of a beginning of a series. This is The Iron Trial by Holly Black and Cassandra Clare, and it's the first book in the Magisterium series. I think it's a 6-book series. Originally I went in thinking it was like 4 books, but I've seen now that I'm pretty sure there's like 5 or 6. But anyway, it's a middle grade fantasy following Colum Cole, who all his life he's been warned by his father to stay away from magic. To succeed at the Iron Trial and be admitted into the vaunted Magisterium school would bring bad things, but he fails at failing. Only hard work, loyal friends, danger and a puppy await. And it's kind of like that magical school setting. It was a lot of fun, actually. It was an enjoyable first story to a series. I gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars, and as I mentioned, it was a fun start to the series. I hadn't much experience with Holly Black's novels, but I have recently just read through all the Mortal Instruments series by Cassandra Clare, so it was interesting on reflection to see how she does YA in comparison to middle grade. I can't say that I really liked Cole much as a character, but I was definitely interested in his induction into this school of magic, especially with his perspective of being told that magic is evil, stay away from it, yada yada yada, and as well as kind of learning more about the mystery surrounding his parents, one who's alive and one who has passed away. It was lovely to see him finally make friends and maintain genuine relationships as well, and I also really appreciated the disability rep. Up next, unfortunately, another DNF for the month, and so soon after Malice as well, unfortunately. This is Artemis Cole by Owen Cole, and this is actually the second time I've tried reading this. So I read this back in like 2014, I want to say, and I just stopped reading it for whatever reason. I think I gave a little bit more explanation about that in my written review if you want to check that out. Goodreads linked in the description, and so is my story graph. So yeah, like 10 years later, flash forward to now, I decided to give it a go again. So we're following 12-year-old Artemis Fowl, who's a millionaire, a genius, and above all, a criminal mastermind. But even Artemis doesn't know what he's taken on when he kidnaps a fairy, Captain Holly Short of the LEP Recon Unit. These aren't the fairies of bedtime stories, they're dangerous, full of unexpected twists and turns. Artemis Fowl is a riveting, magical adventure, and unfortunately, I just cannot agree with that. I'm upset, honestly, because I thought this could be a series that I'd absolutely love. Even after the unintentional DNFing to begin with, like years ago, I still thought, you know, trying it again, I always had intention to go back to it and start again, but it's just not for me. So I did another blended reading with this one, physically and listening to the audiobook. The audiobook really threw me off because when I got to like halfway, it sounded like it started to repeat itself again, and I don't know if this was to do with like this time slip concept that they were talking about or what, but I also didn't care enough to carry on to see if that was resolved or if it was like an error in the audiobook. And to be honest, all that time listening and reading it physically, I just wasn't with it. I wasn't vibing with it, so I stopped around 60%, which is further than I got in before. Yeah, unfortunately this series isn't for me, but I think I will still give the movie a go because it's generally a concept I want to see if I enjoy in some capacity. I don't know why I've got this like hold up on Artemis Fowl. I want to see how at least the first story ends, you know. It's something about it's plaguing me. After that, I listened to another audiobook through my library service, and this one was kind of like a random one that I just found as I was scrolling through like keywords and things like that. I've been listening and reading a lot of vampire stories of late, and this I think came up whilst I was searching for more vampire reads. So this is The Blood Countess, book 1 in the Pandora English series by Tara Moss. So Pandora English is no ordinary small town orphan. When she's invited to live with her mysterious great aunt Celia in New York City, she seizes the opportunity to escape her stifling hometown, break from her tragic past, and make it as a writer. Things, however, are not what she's expecting. For starters, her great aunt's gothic mansion is in a misty Manhattan suburb that doesn't appear on the maps. And then there's Celia herself, a former designer to the stars of Hollywood's golden age, who is elegant, unnaturally young, and always wearing a veil. Pandora lands a job at a fashion magazine, and her first assignment is covering the A-list launch of the latest miracle cream, Blood of Youth. But something is not right about the product, nor Athanasia, the drop-dead beautiful face of the brand. It seems there may be a secret ingredient in Blood of Youth, a secret worth killing for. This is YA, urban fantasy, supernatural kind of thing. Vampires. And unfortunately I gave this one a 2.5 out of 5 stars. I mean, it was a bit different for me, with heavy themes of like the elite world of the fashion industry. It was kind of giving Devil Wears Prada, even though I've never seen that before, meets vampire, you know, seduction, ghosts, that sort of thing. I think one of my main things with it was just too heavily descriptive, but there wasn't anything really wrong with that, because it did, unlike Malice to me, give a clear image of what was happening, and I could see what was, you know, happening scene by scene. It just felt a bit juvenile, too guided in its writing style, like the reader couldn't figure anything out. The Blood of Youth seminar sounded like an MLM cult, which I quite enjoyed that aspect too. I watch a lot of YouTube videos about, you know, pyramid schemes and things like that, so it was interesting to see this in like a fantastical setting and see those like crossovers there. The narrator's voice was pretty grating on me. It put on that overly, you know, when an older person is trying to be someone much younger, like when they're doing acting and stuff, it just felt overly upbeat, this imitation of a youngster's voice, and it was just too chipper and just not genuine, you know. Honestly though, I didn't really care much about Pandora. There wasn't really enough unique details to make the story stand out to me. It was an okay read, nothing wrong with it majorly, but nothing new, nothing inspiring or particularly entertaining either, so probably won't continue on with the series personally. Okay, the 6th book I read, and I think the last book I'll talk about in this video today, is The Copper Gauntlet, which is the 2nd book of the Magisterium series by Holly Black and Cassandra Clare. So this is following the trio again, Callum and his friends, but it's mainly set in the summer break, I would say. And yeah, obviously I don't want to go too much into this because it is the sequel to a series and I don't want to spoil anything for anyone that might be interested. So this is a solid continuation to the series with a strong sequel. So many times you can have a sequel that kind of suffers from second book syndrome, but I don't think this one did. And in fact, I enjoyed this one a little bit more than the first book, giving it a rating of 3.5 stars out of 5, whereas the first book I gave just a solid 3-star. The characters in this story were definitely fleshed out well, and the story progressed fabulously with some great twists to the story. Unfortunately, the twists were still a little bit predictable for me, but I would say it didn't decrease the impact or enjoyment of the turn of the story, and I still was thoroughly enjoying what I was reading. So that is it for my update in my reading, what I've been reading so far in October. Do let me know what you have been reading, and again, apologies for the kind of shoddy filming setup this time around. Hopefully it'll be my usual quality next time, but for now, thank you so much for watching, and I shall catch you in another video soon. Bye.